Leandro Cuccioli, SVP of Strategy, Corporate Development, Sustainability, and IR at Mercado Libre. Leandro, welcome. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us today. We will have some time afterwards for Q&A as well after the fireside chat. But Leandro, if we could start off, please. You were at this conference last year. You're actually sitting in the front row because at that time you hadn't formally joined Mercado Libre at that time. So if you could give us an introduction to yourself, please. You've had a very varied and interesting background and the unique perspectives that you bring to the role at Mercado Libre.
Okay, well, and thank you very much for having us. So yes, last year I was part of the audience. I couldn't participate because I was joining Meli in July, and this was in June. So as you said, I run strategy, corporate development, and IR for Meli. Before this, I was here in London working for BII, which is the closest that the British government has to a sovereign fund. It's a DFI. Before that, I was 4 years in the cabinet of Macri, the president of Argentina. I was deputy minister of finance, and I collected taxes for Argentina, which is not your best option for a career. And before that, I was in private equity here in London, working for the Capital Group, the big asset manager. Before that, it gets too old to remember. But that's my background, yeah.
And in terms of how you can bring those experiences from your previous career to Mercado Libre, many of the management have been there for many years, obviously. So what sort of fresh insights do you
Well, I guess, it's when I was coming into Mercado Libre, I was asking myself that question: what I'm going to add to this group of people that they've been incredibly successful over time. I think that depending the part of my role, but clearly being in London for a long time and being exposed, particularly in the last couple of years, to a lot of business models in Asia, I think has helped us in the last year to continue understanding, all the different trends and things that may hit Latin America, and from quick commerce, from social commerce, and other things that in India or in Southeast Asia are more developed. And I think that as you've seen this year, and we're doing with Richard and Flora here in my team, we're trying to broaden also our reach as investor relations. We went to Singapore and the Middle East for the first time last year, and a lot of people still don't know Meli, right? I mean, this is the first time we're going to Frankfurt on Friday to see investors that are very big, but when we look at how much they own of Meli, they don't own enough in our view. And I think that part of it is because if you don't get exposed to us and understand the company, it has become a little bit complex to understand from the outside. So I think I brought this fresh perspective, and we're trying to execute on that.
Thank you. Sticking on the theme of management change, the company has announced recently, of course, that the founder and CEO, Marcos Galperin, is moving on, transitioning to a role as executive chairman, to be succeeded internally by Ariel, who's currently running the commerce business. And Marcos described it as a generational change, but I think the market and investors in general have taken it in their stride and seen it as a well-planned succession. So if you could give us your perspectives on that change and whether from the outside we should expect to see any changes in the coming months and years.
Yeah, I don't think you will see a lot of change in the next few months or years, because there's not a change in strategy, right? Marcos has been studying a lot of transitions, Google, Apple, Amazon, etc., trying to find what is the right way for the founder to transition. It's never easy, right? I mean, he started the business in 1999. He's not going anywhere. I mean, what he has decided is, look, I'm going to become executive chairman, and I'm going to do this in a very smooth way to someone in the business that basically knows the business extremely well. Ariel has been, running our commerce operation, arguably 50% of the business. But before that, he was instrumental in probably one of the main strategic, pivots that Mercado Libre made in its 26 years, which was to create the shipping arm, basically the logistics arm of Mercado Libre. Until 2017, we barely touched any package that went through our network, and now we are responsible for 95% of the packages that go, between sellers and buyers go through our network. So Ariel is a very well-known quantity. I think to investors as well. We've had him in the last 2-3 years in investor calls and in roadshows. He was here last year. And I think Marcos is he said he will focus on strategy, capital allocation, culture. I mean, we had several calls with investors, the top 10, and he was saying, look, I'm not getting married again. I'm not sending rockets to Mars. Don't worry. I mean, I'm staying put in the business. So I think that it's a natural transition.
And with your strategy hat on, presumably you'll continue to be working very closely with him.
Yeah, too much now. Yeah.
From the outside, from the outside, it always appears that one of perhaps the biggest challenges as well as opportunities that Meli faces is just the number of opportunities that the company has to grow and to invest. Whether it's on the logistics side, credit, loyalty program, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So could you give us some insights into how you think about prioritizing investments, allocation of resources in general, and how those priorities could shift over the coming years?
Yeah, and I think it is very much related to where we see the development of our markets, right? So if we look at the penetration of e-commerce in the region in Latin America is around 15%. And when we look at fintech, in some places like Mexico, it's a very low penetration of financial services, right? 11% of Mexicans have a credit card, only 60% a bank account. And in case of Argentina, we're coming from a period in which credit has been non-existent, right? So that dictates a lot of the priorities in the next few years because we see a lot of opportunities of deepening the ecosystem that we have today. So from launching the credit card in Argentina, expanding our fintech products in Mexico, or continue developing our logistics network, right? I mean, we're growing, if you look at the items shipped, the volume that we're growing year on year, it's between, it's around 30%, 35%, depending on geography. That means that in 2 years, your capacity almost needs to double, right? So in the short term, it's not very difficult to allocate resources because the three markets continue to, just to provide so much traction in terms of what we need to build to do the same that we do, but bigger, because the market is still, it's like, in football terms, 15 minutes of the first half. Now, when you look further afield, in 5 years plus, I think there are areas that, start to become very important for us, like advertising and our platform on the TV in terms of an entertainment hub or health or other areas where we can see that we can still be at the center of the life of our users. But I would say in the short term is not very different from what you've seen in the last year or two.
And on that theme, of course, just in the last couple of weeks, you've made some fairly significant changes, but arguably very much in line with your existing strategy of increasing the amount of free shipping available to buyers in Brazil, reducing the cost of shipping from the seller's side as well. So if you could elaborate on that and how that feeds into the long-term vision and the potential short-term impact you expect to see from that as well.
Yeah, I think when you look back at, I remember visiting Mexico in 2013 to look at a company that was called Linio at the time, and I remember I was talking to the guy from Mercado Libre in Mexico saying, look, penetration of e-commerce is 0.5% of sales. And the problem here is logistics, payments, and credit. So, we've been trying all this time to reduce the frictions for people to come online. And we've seen, particularly in the case of Brazil, the effect that reducing the free shipping threshold has had in terms of bringing more people online, and the people that were online increasing their frequency. So we started at 119 reais of free shipping threshold back in 17. Then we went to 99. We went to 79 and now to 19. So I know it's a big leap, but I think that what we feel is that we are now ready in terms of our capacity and our cost in order to be able to serve those consumers. And I was equating to when in the UK, I think we had Prime coming here, I think in 2012 or 13. I remember it was £5 a year, and it was the free shipping was the thing, right? And I remember that my buying pattern changed a lot, right? This is what you would buy, right? You would not care, that you don't need to build a cart in order to make sense. You can buy today, you can buy tomorrow. So when we look at the frequency in Mercado Libre, today we're at probably 9-10 purchases a year. And you look at a more mature market, Amazon is at 50. So you have a lot to, you really go very far with some of these measures. So we expect to bring more people online, and we expect to, increase the frequency. So it's a natural evolution of the strategy, I would say.
And further to that point, the key driver, it seems, of GMV growth over the last couple of years has really been user growth, right? If we look at growth in items sold, been fairly closely in line with growth in the total number of users. So do you think we're reaching the point now at which increased purchase frequency becomes a much more important driver relative to user growth? Or
I would say both, right? Because we still have, we had 100 million unique buyers in a region of 650. Of course, you cannot count on the 650, but we still feel that there is a lot of people out there that, keep coming to the platform, right? So we expect both, but you're right that over time, I think the metric that then we will need to maximize for when you get a good penetration in the population is going to be the frequency. And you've seen things like this, or our supermarket effort that it's been growing at 65% year on year, all goes in the same direction, having the people buy more times in Mercado Libre.
The supermarket category that you just mentioned, I think that was a kind of key highlight really of the Q1 results, that very strong growth that you saw there. And it sounded from the comments that you were making at that time that you have increased confidence in the potential for that particular category, and also see 1P playing an increasingly important role within that category. It brings challenges with it, of course, which are very different to other categories as well. So perhaps we could talk about the particular challenges that you face there and how you see that evolving.
And particularly, I think we started to speak more loudly about supermarket, even we did our first advertising on TV this year, because we felt that we are finally cracking the 1P piece. And for us, supermarket mainly has been dry, right? So our fresh offering, we only do it in Mexico through a partner. The second largest retailer in the country is called Chedraui, is listed. And there we have a partnership, more like an Instacart type of model in which, we all do the digital journey of the customer, but they are doing the fulfillment of the order from the different branches. So we're very respectful about fresh. I think supermarket fresh is a very different level of complexity. So the supermarket that we've been talking about, and it's mainly what we've been doing, it's our dry and CPG effort, which is all 1P. But for a platform like ours that 95% is 3P, it took us to learn about 1P, which is a very different. You need to know about inventory and all of that, demand planning. So I think that we are now at a moment in which all these, more kind of daily essentials and subscribe and save kind of items is something that we are in a good position to expand. We keep developing our partnerships with different fresh, supermarket providers in the region to try to continue with this model that I was describing, because, going into 1P model fresh, it's very complex. It's very hard to do.
And on the 1P side, you've also talked about the role that advertising has to play, arguably more importantly so than in the 3P business when you're dealing with some of the CPG categories, so forth. So that's probably a good segue into that particular part of the business. How do you see the advertising evolving from the model that really is currently predominant within your platform, to more display, key brand advertising, and so forth?
Yeah, I think we feel that we have the right to create the best media company in Latin America, right? And we're not there yet, right? I think that Televisa and Globo and just Google and Meta, these guys are ahead of us. But in digital, we're number 3 behind Google and Meta. And we feel, so if we take a step back, we think that the market can be several times larger in LATAM, right? So it's a $50 billion market in terms of advertising total. 50% is digital, while a place like here in the UK would be 75. So there you already have, a share of digital that can grow. But then inside digital, retail media is probably 8% of the market, and here it would be 15, 20. So we have several, and we are the leaders in retail media, in digital. So we have several steps in which we believe the market can be much larger, doing what we do today, right? Now, the reality is that, as you said, our business continues to be 85% of the advertising revenues are, advertisers paying for their product to be displayed in Mercado Libre, at the top of, the search, right? So that's for Amazon probably 70%, for us it's 85. And then, as you correctly said, display and video are, logical next iterations. Now, when you get into display, and particularly in video, then you start to need to go off platform as well, right? So the real estate, to put in a way of advertising in your platform, will be very much consumed by your search business and your display business. When you want to offer advertisers not only the option to convert their dollars into instant sales, which is what we've been doing, but you want to offer them, the ability to spend some of their branding dollars, in which they're not looking for sale, they're looking for awareness and reach. Then you need to develop all different properties outside Mercado Libre. And that's where we did a deal with Disney, in which our loyalty program members have access to Disney Plus, advertise with advertising in LATAM. We have our own content platform, free content platform called Mercado Play, which from April onwards, you have it in the TVs in Latin America. So if you buy a LG TV, a Samsung TV, now it comes with a yellow app that has Mercado Play, and that has advertising, of course, embedded in it. So the more that we develop these properties, the more we can go to a Nestlé, Unilever, and these guys and say, look, not only give me through the same DSP, the same demand side platform that we manage, not only give me your dollars for conversion inside Mercado Libre, but give me your dollars for branding outside Mercado Libre. And that's going off platform is the future of the business, right? If you want to create a media company, you need to create it on Mercado Libre and off Mercado Libre. So that's the direction of travel.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because we often get asked about how advertising as a percentage of GMV goes from the sort of 2%
I hate that metric. It's the worst metric ever.
To the 5, 6,
because
7%
it doesn't make
level.
any sense.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we are not trying, at a certain point, if I'm trying to create a media company that is going to decouple from the GMV, right? It's going to be creating on its own right, because not everything will go back to Mercado Libre. Of course, there are parts that go back to Mercado Libre as a sale, and that's the beauty of the first-party data, and we can create a lot of attribution with it. But then we're going to have, the more that we develop off Mercado Libre properties, we'll not have that link, right? So we want to talk about the advertising business in its own right, and not only tied to the GMV, and also because tomorrow we could, crank up the advertising business, 30-40%, but then we would pollute, the experience. If you go into some of our international competitors, I will not name them, and you see, your experience, it's a lot of advertising, right? And I think we want to be very careful of not that polluting the conversion inside Mercado Libre.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe switching tack slightly and looking at some of your key markets. Argentina has been a huge focus for investors over the last year and more. Clearly your original home market. I think Meli has been demonstrating its commitment and view of the opportunity there with some of the recent statements you made about applying for a banking license, launching a credit card in the second half of this year. So you could talk about what you're seeing there that gives you the confidence to move ahead with these steps and how you see that evolving.
Look, it's our home market. Most of our management team is from Argentina. That means that we never get too excited, we never get too depressed, right? I think we are more balanced than, sometimes I see the investor community saying, I remember someone asking me last year when I joined, do you think Meli will blow up because of Argentina? And now everyone is saying, no, tell me more about Argentina. We will not blow up, and you don't need to get that excited on the other. We have a great business in Argentina, right? We have 65% market share in e-commerce. The second player in market share is single digits. We have 60% plus of the adults in Argentina use Mercado Pago to pay every day because the QR code has become there, everywhere, like in China, right? So the business has not changed from last year to this year or 2 years ago in terms of what it is in Argentina. Of course, from an investor point of view, now, if Argentina was traded at a discount, that discount has narrowed in a way, and people are putting a lot of emphasis on that. The country continues to be, from an e-commerce point of view, we still see the same that we see in the rest of Latam, at least in Mexico and Brazil, is mid-teens penetration, a lot to be done. Of course, the moments that Argentina gets closer to a more normal situation, normal is still 2% inflation a month, right? But it was 20. But the moment that becomes closer, you have some tools that we can deploy in Argentina that we couldn't deploy in the years before. Like our penetration of fulfillment is 22% in Argentina. So why is that, right? Well, in part because of very high inflation, the cost for a seller to give you their inventory to you, it's prohibitive, right? I mean, people will not do it. As inflation comes down, we announced a new fulfillment center in Argentina, the first one since 2018. You correctly said the credit card, the banking license. Our book in credit increased 4 times, in a year. But the credit the size of the financial system in Argentina is the same of Haiti. I mean, Central America. It's very small, right? So we're starting from a very small base. So we're very excited about what we can build if this continues, and we think it's going to continue. I mean, I don't see anything that why this year or the next cannot continue. But even in an Argentina that goes back to the previous Argentina, I want to make sure that people understand that we still have a great business. Of course, when we look at our 22 and 23 numbers, you had the FX losses, below the EBIT. That was the price for converting those official dollars into real dollars outside of the country. That has shrunk, but the business has not changed in fundamentals.
Yeah, and Argentina has historically been a much more profitable market, at least looking at the reported margins relative to Mexico and Brazil. So do you think with some of the investments that you're starting to make there now that we could see a bit of a shift in that area potentially?
Well, clearly, if we're going to launch the credit card, that has a drag, as we've seen in the other markets, right? Because of the nature of the credit card, you need to incur in these provisions at the beginning. And until the different cohorts just go into profitability. I think while that may be true, at the same time, I don't foresee in the short period a change in the competitive situation in Argentina, right? I mean, I think that because of the 4 years of Macri and then Kirchner coming back, I think that people that I'm not talking about financial investments, in fixed income. I'm talking about people committing to Argentina as a market. I think it's going to take a couple of years, right? So I'm not saying it will not happen. Eventually, if Argentina, and hopefully, right, if Argentina continues to do these 4, 5, 6 years, I think we're going to face a very different competitive dynamic, but a market that is several times the size that is today. So I think that both things compensate. It would be great if that happens.
No, for sure. Turning to Mexico, which is where you're based now, have been for the last year or so. I think it's widely recognized that there's a huge opportunity on the fintech side there, right? Pretty much any financial product you look at is vastly underpenetrated versus most of the markets in the region or outside of the region for that matter. But by the same token, there's quite a large number of fintechs trying to build a business there at various stages of growth and raising capital. So do you see there being sufficient white space there for most of these players to prosper? To what extent do you see that developing into more of a competitive scenario, let's say?
Well, I have questions around the strategies of some of these players because I think the space is ample, right? I mean, you have 5 banks that concentrate probably between 70 and 80% of the loans and the deposits. While in a country like the UK would be 45%, 57% in Brazil, right? So you have still a lot of deposits and loans concentrated in the hands of a few. And then, we always quote these numbers, 40% of Mexicans not having a bank account, 11% of Mexicans only having a credit card. So it's a huge space in a country of 130 million. Now, the challenge, I think, to build a business in Mexico, particularly in the lending side, is data, right? I mean, just, underwriting credit is not easy, right? So I think there, I think we have a unique competitive advantage, which is the marketplace, right? So we have more than 20 million customers in the marketplace, which gives us a very rich set of data to understand who to lend and how much, and which tenor. Others don't have that, and they need to have their own strategies. Now, when you add all these guys together, us, some of our competitors, etc., all of us, we're probably, if you look at the loan portfolio, we're 6 or 7% of the loan portfolio of one bank, of the 5, right? So it's very early days. We're all very tiny, but the opportunity is huge. But Mexico, I mean, I've been going to Mexico since 2007, and things take time. I mean, it's not that it's going to look like that, and I don't think it's going to have the speed of Brazil, for example, in which you saw with PIX and all of that. In 10 years, this changing dramatically. I think Mexico is not that will not go that way, but it's going to take more time.
Yeah. And then some of your other markets fly under the radar a little bit, arguably, in terms of investor attention, just given their size relative to the big 3 markets where you're present, but clearly have a lot of potential in terms of the size of the economies and populations. So it's probably going back to one of the earlier questions, really asking about resource allocation and so forth. But over what sort of time period do you think that those markets could start to move further up the priority list in terms of investment?
I don't see that in the very short term. I mean, if we take a step back, so mainly today is 50% Brazil, 25% Mexico, 15% Argentina, and the rest of Latin America is the 5% that is left. The reality is that those markets that would be Colombia, Ecuador, Chile, Peru, Paraguay, if you add them together, it's like another Mexico in population. But it never works like that, right? I mean, you need to develop the ecosystem in each place. And today Chile is our 4th market, and Colombia our 5th. Colombia is a 51 million people country, so people say, well, why shouldn't that be? And I think it's a question of, so far the resources that are being dedicated to Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina in that order are of a magnitude that it's been very difficult to develop the ecosystem, the full ecosystem in another place. I think in Chile we have made a lot of progress in the last few years, and the business is doing very well. Colombia has a penetration of e-commerce of 7.5%, right? So it's half of Mexico. And we don't have a credit card. We have very little of our ecosystem deployed there. While we'll continue to do it, I don't see the focus changing from doing more in Brazil or doing more in Mexico. And the other countries as well. I mean, someone was asking me about Paraguay the other day. I said, look, great country, 6-7 million people growing very nicely, but you open a new fulfillment center in Sao Paulo, and it's more than that, right? So I think for the time being, I don't see a drastic change. I don't see also the strategic urgency in some of these countries, while I think there is a strategic urgency in some of the countries like Brazil and Mexico, given the competition that we face there, right?
Right, yeah. Final question from my side, and then we'll open the floor up to Q&A as well. But I think Meli's got a track record of trying out things, iterating for often many years until they start to work, and then when they do work, putting a lot behind them and really scaling them up. So can you give us any insights into what we might be seeing in 5 or 10 years' time that isn't really that visible at the moment, but which you think could be potentially exciting opportunities?
Well, yeah, I think that Meli, I would describe it, is not the first mover ever, but is the first to scale, right? So I think that, as you said, it iterates a lot and learns a lot and fails a lot, right? And I think that is the culture of the place, that is the kind of the sacred, thing that we don't need to lose. I would say from, of course, we talked about advertising, we talked about other things. I think the one that I see, not immediate, but because we're trying and failing, we're in the middle of trying and failing, is health and pharma, right? I think that if you look at your life and the verticals of your online presence, you just entertainment, health, education, transportation, goods and services. health is such an important part of our lives. And in Latin America, you have, I don't know, depending in Brazil or Mexico, you might have 60, 70 million people in each that are dependent on the public sector. And if you guys complain about the NHS, just go to a Brazilian hospital in the north, and you're going to, it's different, right? So I think that that means that there is a huge opportunity to develop a very robust product that has primary care through teleconsultation, discounts in medicines and tests and all of that. That solves probably 80% of your life in terms of health. But in order to do that, you need to connect with the physical world, and it has challenges. So we are experimenting a lot in Sao Paulo, with trying to create a very high NPS, good health service that potentially, why not, we can roll out. That could be huge, right? Because you can see a lot of potential synergies with the marketplace. And if you go a little bit beyond, you can think about wellness as a concept. But again, this is a little bit like science fiction today for us, because we're still trying to make sure that you can get a blood test in Sao Paulo. So we're still very in the early game, but huge potentially.
Yeah, we'll watch that space with interest.
Yeah.
So, Leandro, thank you very much. That's been a good rapid run through all of the key areas of the business, I think. Now, I'm not sure whether we have any microphones, but we do have some time for Q&A, if anyone has any questions.
I
think we've covered it all in that case. Yeah, so
fantastic.
thank you very much, Leandro.
Thank you.
Thank you.